On this episode, we examine Pedestrian Level of Service. Then we drop in on the groundbreaking for the Metropolitan branch trail in Washington, D.C. We attend the opening of the Glenmont Metrorail station in Maryland. We look at pedestrian crossovers in Toronto. We head west to the Cowboy Trail in Nebraska. We join the American Society of Civil Engineers at their meeting on transportation, land use, and air quality. And finally, we talk with Keith Bartholomew of 1000 Friends of Oregon. Stay tuned. We're talking with Jim Charlier of Charlier Associates. What is Charlier Associates?
We're a transportation planning firm.
What does a transportation planning firm do?
We do transportation planning, which means we help mainly cities and counties design and plan transportation systems, pedestrian systems, transit systems, streets.
Transportation planners like to talk about level of service, and there are certain criteria you use for automobiles. But how do you measure pedestrian level of service?
Well, the most important thing is what you don't do, and that is you don't use volume over capacity like engineers do for roads, because it doesn't matter. A pedestrian system can be completely dysfunctional with no people on it, so volume and capacity is not very important. What does matter are issues of connectivity and continuity. A discontinuous sidewalk system is like a chain. If there's one link broken, the chain isn't there. Directness. People are sensitive to how far they have to walk, and if you build indirect walking systems, it increases walk distance and they're less likely to walk. Safety. Street crossings are critical. Unsafe or difficult street crossings are major barriers in pedestrian systems. So all of those things matter a great deal and should be taken into account in designing a level of service system for pedestrians.
Now, what efforts have been made to develop level of service for pedestrians?
Not much. The industry has, planning profession and design professions have done very little to get scientific about planning and designing for pedestrian activity, unfortunately. The City of Fort Collins has done a pretty good job, and I think that's one you can look at. But as far as level of service criteria systems in local planning for pedestrians, there's not much out there yet.
Is there any hope for the future? Are we seeing any change?
Oh, definitely, because every city that we work with, and most of our business is in Colorado and in the West, but every city we're working with is very concerned about pedestrian issues and how to make their city a more pedestrian-oriented place. And so there's a tremendous interest in this subject and a lot of work being done right now.
We're talking with Tim Lydiak, who's co-chair of the Coalition for the Metropolitan Branch Trail. What is the Metropolitan Branch Trail?
The Met Branch Trail is an idea, and the idea is to convert an abandoned railroad trestle running from Union Station to Silver Spring and converting that into a facility for bicyclists, pedestrians, trail users, inline skaters, joggers, strollers, anything without a motor on it, basically, joggers. And the idea is to use this facility and connect it up with another facility in Silver Spring called the Capitol Crescent Trail to form a 27-mile bicycle beltway around and through the District of Columbia. It's the first of its kind in the country.
So how did this idea get started?
It got started basically about 10 years ago in the late 80s when CSX Railroad abandoned a bit of their track alongside the Red Line Metro in D.C. between Union Station and Silver Spring. Cyclists and other trail users in town looked out of the Metro Red Line and said, gee, that would be a great linear park for use by cyclists and others. We also had another great idea. There was an abandoned rail bed in Bethesda going down to Georgetown that was in the process of being converted into a Rails to Trails project. And that gave us the idea that we could do the same thing here in the heart of the District of Columbia. And when we looked at a map a little further, we realized, gee, we can connect the two, and together with the National Mall, form a 27-mile beltway for trail users, cyclists, and others.
And you finally had groundbreaking today.
Finally, yes.
How'd that finally come apart after all these years? What was the key to accomplishing?
The key was money. It was political perseverance. We've been throwing the idea up to the D.C. government, Department of Public Works, to Eleanor Holmes Norton's office for a few years now. And we've gotten a few of these policy and political folks on the Capitol Crescent Trail, and they have seen what a great facility that is. And I think that was one of the turning moments. The other thing has been the availability of federal funding. Now a small percentage of federal funding can go to bicycle pedestrian trail projects, and we've seized upon that. As we speak, they're building a half-mile segment of trail along John McCormick Road next to Catholic University. That should be complete within the next year. From there, we were just told by Sal Bernardino, head of the D.C. Department of Public Works, that in the new transportation bill there will be $8.5 million to acquire the needed parcels along the corridor, and D.C. government will be pledging another $8 million for the trail. So it looks like finally, after 9 years of fighting hard and really holding on to the belief that we can build this thing, we have $16 million ready to go to build this thing. And now the other strategy once again will be political perseverance, to stay on these political and policy folks to get this trail built. And we think it can get built over the next few years, and we're all looking forward to it, I especially. Thanks.
We're at the new Metro station in Glenmont, Maryland, talking with Wes Vernon, who's a member of the Action Committee for Transit. What is the Action Committee for Transit?
Well, as its name suggests, Don, we're advocates of mass transit and minimal use of the automobile and mass transit in its place. Some of our members don't even own cars. I don't go that far. I believe you've got to deal with the cards that are dealt you in life. But we do advocate mass transit wherever possible for a lot of environmental and economic reasons.
Today, it's the grand opening of the Glenmont Metro Station. What's the significance of that?
Oh, let me tell you, this is a red letter day for this community. I mean, I've been fighting for this thing for nearly 30 years. Our particular neighborhood in the Glenmont area at one time back in the 70s was about the only one advocating this Glenmont station. You had some NIMBYs out here, NIMBY being not in my backyard, who felt that they were country squires and that the subway was something beneath them, no pun intended. But somehow that evolved over the years, and they've come to accept it, and I'm glad, because I've really fought for this tooth and nail.
Where will this subway line take you?
This subway line actually ends up back in Montgomery County. It goes all the way downtown Washington, making such stops as Union Station, Metro Center, which is the main interchange point for the various lines, DuPont Circle, up to Friendship Heights, Bethesda, and then on to Rockville and Shady Grove.
Now that the red line's finished, what's next?
Whoopee! On to Aspen Hill and Olney, hopefully. That's something that they should have thought of, in my judgment, right at the beginning 30 years ago. More realistically, what the politicians are talking about is the Purple Line, which is a cross-county metro line. And also, we've had on the back burner for years and years and years the trolley line between Bethesda and Silver Spring, because this line operates like a horseshoe. From here, the eastern end of the county, down to downtown Washington, and then up on the western side to Bethesda and Rockville. We'd like to have a trolley line going from Silver Spring to Bethesda to link them together, so you don't have to go all the way downtown just to get back to the other end of the county.
So, what's the status of that? Where are we?
Well, the trolley line is something that has been kicked around on the county council for years and years and years. You may have noticed upstairs we had people carrying signs urging that it be moved forward. Purple Line, it's got all the politicians behind it, it just doesn't have the money yet. And so it's just an open question as to whether I'll live long enough to see it. I hope so. I hope they move it along.
Pedestrians have the right of way in the crosswalk, but how do you get drivers to pay attention? We were up in Toronto recently and took a look at their pedestrian crossovers. The pedestrian crossover consists of large illuminated X's suspended over a crosswalk. A pedestrian wanting to use the crossover presses a button to activate flashing yellow lights. He then points to indicate his intention to enter the street. Cars are required to stop. Parking is prohibited near the crossover to give clear visibility to drivers and pedestrians. Passing is also prohibited near the crossover to prevent an overtaking car from threatening a pedestrian. The lights for the overhead signs also shine down on the crosswalk, increasing visibility at night. The pedestrian crossover, one more tool for transportation engineers to help pedestrians get safely across the street. We're talking with Larry Vokes, who's the Nebraska State Trails Coordinator. And you've been working on what's going to be the longest rail trail in the nation.
Longest rail-to-trail conversion in the United States, that's correct, the Cowboy Trail across Nebraska.
How long is it going to be?
321 miles when completed. At the present, we're working on the development and finishing up the salvage on about 250 miles of that 321.
How'd this come into being?
Well, in December of '94, the right-of-way was donated to the state of Nebraska through the Rails to Trails Conservancy in Washington, D.C. It was after the CNNW decided to go out of business in Nebraska, and when that happened, the Conservancy purchased the right-of-way from the railroad and then entered into the salvage contracts to have it salvaged and then donated the land to the state of Nebraska.
So where'd the name Cowboy Trail come from?
Well, Cowboy Trail is a derivative of what the CNNW called the Cowboy Line across Nebraska that really went all the way across Nebraska and into Wyoming.
This trail's not going to make it quite that far, though.
Well, no, not quite that far, but almost. It'll make it all the way from Norfolk to Chadron. And so that's what, 75 miles short of the Wyoming line.
If someone were to bike the whole length of the trail once it's complete, what would they see?
Well, Nebraska, contrary to some folks' belief when they travel the interstate and see nothing but flat, barren land, is a very diverse state. When you start on the east end of the trail in the Norfolk area, you're going to be going through quite a few different river bottoms, primarily the Elkhorn River bottom, very lush cropland. Then when you get close to O'Neill, Nebraska, which is 75 miles later, you'll start entering haying country in Nebraska, vast haying meadows, Ainsworth, another 60 miles down the road, and you start entering the sandhills of Nebraska, which are incidentally the largest set of dunes in the Western Hemisphere, over 20,000 square miles of sandhills. When you reach the Niobrara River at Valentine, Nebraska, you enter into an area of Nebraska that's very unique. There are 5 major ecological systems that meet in that river valley. The only place on the North American continent that happens. 3 major forests, 2 major grasslands. When you leave the Niobrara River Valley, you continue on through the sandhills until you reach Chadron, Nebraska, where you start entering the Pine Ridge country, which really is the tail end or the southern end of the Black Hills of South Dakota.
How much of the trail is completed so far?
Well, at the present, we only have 14 miles of the trail that's open to the public. Those 14 miles were dedicated in September of '97. We think that possibly by mid-July of '98 we will have an additional 35 miles ready to open. And then it's going to depend upon future funding as to what we can accomplish. ICE-T has been reappropriated by the United States Congress, signed by the President, so we're pretty hopeful there that some additional monies will be coming to further develop the trail and be able to open more of the trail to the public. Up until that time, we're going to have to wait and see with what we have, and those areas that are open now will be, including that will be open in July, is between Norfolk and Neely, Nebraska, about a 33-mile stretch there where you have Neely Mills, incidentally, an historical site. A small section between Inman and O'Neill, Nebraska, that's 8 miles, and then a section of about 6 miles in the Valentine area that we were talking about earlier.
And the trail has a lot of bridges. What are the most notable ones of those?
Well, the bridges are a whole other story on the Cowboy Trail. There are a total of 221 bridges on the trail. If you were to put them end to end, you'd have 3 miles of bridges. The longest one of those across the Niobrara River Valley at Valentine is a 1/4 mile long, 148 feet off of the river bottom. Very spectacular view up and down the valley. Another notable bridge at Long Pine, Nebraska, nearly as tall as the Niobrara Bridge, about 700 feet in length. Another beautiful view of a very nice trout stream, Long Pine Creek. And then, of course, I think that the bridges in the Elkhorn River Valley, of which there's numerous bridges, just make a very nice hiking and biking area off highway. Very, very nice.
For an update on construction of the Cowboy Trail, contact Nebraska Travel and Tourism at 800-228-4307. We're in Portland, Oregon, talking with Don Samdahl, who's chair of the Transportation Planning Committee for the American Society of Civil Engineers. What is the American Society of Civil Engineers?
Well, American Society of Civil Engineers is a group of professional civil engineers, about 130,000 around the world, who participate in all aspects of planning, design, construction of public infrastructure.
And what would be the relationship between a civil engineer and a transportation engineer?
Well, transportation is one part of civil engineering. It covers anything from bicycles, pedestrians, automobiles, roads, public transportation, bridges, and any other types of ways to move people from one place to another.
And you're also co-chair of the conference. It's been going on here the last couple of days.
Right.
Transportation, land use, and air quality, making the connection. What is the connection?
Well, the connection is the fact that whenever we make any decisions with respect to transportation or land use, they have an effect on each other. And together, they both have an effect on how good our air quality is and the rest of the environment.
And is this something new? Why are you having a meeting about this now?
Well, it's not new. There's been a lot more discussion in recent years about the connection between transportation and land use, but most of the time we spend our efforts talking about what can we do with transportation or what can we do with land use, but we don't often talk about how can we make land use changes to help transportation, or what can we do about transportation that will help us come up with better land use choices.
So what have people concluded the last few days? What are they going home with?
They're going home with first of all, the understanding that, in fact, there are some things that they can do, both in the transportation and land use area, to work together and making air quality better. I'll give you an example. We've been talking a lot about using different types of public transportation as well as non-motorized transportation, bicycles and pedestrians, to work with good land use design to encourage people to leave their cars at home. It sounds very simple, but it's not always easy to accomplish in practice. And the people that are here are planners and engineers for agencies and consultants around the country, in fact around the world, and they are getting a good idea of the techniques and methods to do this successfully.
We're in Portland talking with Keith Bartholomew of 1,000 Friends of Oregon. What is 1,000 Friends of Oregon?
1,000 Friends is a nonprofit citizens group formed in 1975 to monitor and influence the implementation of the state land use planning program here in Oregon.
And how has the land use planning evolved over the years?
Well, Oregon in the 1960s was growing at about double the national average in population, and people here were very concerned about the impacts that growth might have on quality of life, on natural resources, on the continuation of farming as a major part of our economy. And so in 1973, our governor at the time, Tom McCall, and several leaders in our state legislature put together a Land Use Planning Act that was signed into law that year. And as a result of that act, every city and every county in the state is required to do comprehensive planning and to meet certain state standards when they do that planning. So Thousand Friends was put together a couple of years after that to kind of watchdog that process and to provide some maybe extra impetus to making sure that the program is implemented effectively.
And Thousand Friends, a lot of people associate it with LUTRAC. What is LUTRAC and how did that come into being?
Well, LUTRAC is kind of a slant acronym. It stands for Land Use, Transportation, Air Quality. And it grew out of a controversy over a proposed new suburban freeway in the Portland metropolitan area. Out in Washington County, which is kind of the western third of our metropolitan area, we've seen a great deal of growth in population and employment. They call it the Silicon Forest because it has been successful in attracting a lot of high-tech industry. And partly as a result of that growth, and also as a result of maybe some not terribly future-thinking planning that's happened in the past there's a lot of traffic congestion. And as typically happens when you have traffic congestion, the political response is, let's build a new freeway. Thousand Friends of Oregon and a sister organization called Sensible Transportation Options for People, or STOP, were interested in looking at some other alternatives. And so the two organizations worked together to develop a different land use plan for Washington County, because it was our observation that the land use plans, as maybe good as they were hoped to be 10 years earlier, really hadn't considered the impacts on transportation. And so we have out in Washington County lots of subdivisions with cul-de-sacs and streets that don't go through and no sidewalks and nothing close by to walk to, even if they did have sidewalks. And the result is you have a land use pattern, a development pattern that is based on the implicit assumption that everybody will drive for every trip, and lo and behold, that's what people do. And with all those people driving, of course, you naturally have lots of congestion. So we came forward with a different alternative for future growth in Washington County, recognizing that the land uses that are there now aren't going to be leaving, or no one's going to be bulldozing those. But as the county grows, we ought to be trying to focus more of the growth into what they call transit-oriented developments, places where it's just a fancy name for small-town America, going back to a style reminiscent of the earlier part of the century, where it's still suburban in nature. It's not a high-rise living by any means, but it is more of a small-town feel, where you have a mixture of uses, where you can walk to the store, where you can walk to school, you can walk to church, you can walk to light rail or bus to get to another part of the region. Not that everybody will walk for every trip, but they ought to at least have the opportunity. And sometimes people accuse us of trying to force people out of cars, and that's actually not at all what we're trying to do. We feel right now the situation is forcing people into cars. And so we're trying to promote an agenda that gives people some choices. So they don't have to drive every trip. They can if they want to, but they ought to be able to have a choice about that. And right now most people do not.
And so you worked on developing the land use transportation connection. Were you successful in coming up with a viable alternative to just attempting to build enough freeways?
Well, we were. We were dealing with a planning process for a freeway, and it's a very constricted process, as anybody who's gone through it knows. And so they were trying to guess what was going to happen in 20 years, projections showed an additional 100,000 households and 150,000 jobs out in Washington County. And what we came up with was a different way to accommodate that growth. We came up with an alternate land use plan that accommodated all that growth. So it wasn't a no growth or slow growth alternative. It had the same number of jobs, the same number of households moving into the county, but instead of having them kind of spread out like peanut butter around the landscape at the fringe, we had those households and jobs more tightly focused in the central portions of the county, not in the downtown. It's not like, this is not about people all moving back into the central city. It's about moving into more centrally located portions of Washington County, still suburban areas, but areas that, again, have that more small town feeling and that are served by light rail transit.
So is that now the plan?
Well, we articulated the alternative. We offered it to the State Department of Transportation. They, in their good graces, included it in their study for the freeway. And at the end of the day, our alternative was selected for going forward, and the freeway was canceled. And what has happened is that the alternative land use plan that we put together was included in a broader regional land use and transportation plan that was put together by Metro, our regional government here.
It's now the late 1990s. This all happened a while ago. What are the issues now? Where do you go from here?
Well, the issue is implementation. We went during the first part of the 90s through a kind of a creative period where we were developing policy and trying to convince local and regional governments to adopt those policies, and we were successful in doing that. Now the question is putting that stuff on the ground. LUTRAC is, for all intents and purposes, the law of the land in Washington County, as it's been expressed by our regional government. And now the local governments in Washington County are having to incorporate those policies into their local plans and zoning ordinances, and that's where we are right now. So it's kind of that middle stage in between the concept and the concrete. It's that interpretive stage that we're in right now, and of course that's where either God or the devil is in those details, and so we're kind of bird dogging that and trying to make sure that as the interpretation of the policy goes down to the concrete level, that the intentions are still fully reflected in the outcome.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.